Good afternoon.
My name is Joel Schaefer from the Delaware County Office of Behavioral Health. This is Delaware County Substance Treatment Overdose Prevention Coalition's first Lunch and Learn. So I'm excited. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you Q Recovery for hosting and providing the food. Thanks to all the presenters and coalition members. So just a real brief little thing about our coalition. So our coalition's goals are to prevent overdoses, reduce stigma, and educate the community about treatment and recovery. And we're hoping that this Lunch and Learn and our fine presenters will help with those goals. So in order to kick this off, we're going to have Delaware County Office of Behavioral Health, Drug and Alcohol Administrator Ann Jennings, a mentor of mine and someone who I know has been advocating for this population for a very long time. So she's going to come and start this. So come on up.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Hi.
Thank you, Bill, for that introduction. By far, an administrator has a team. I could not do anything without the team that I have, and I'm very blessed. Delaware County's Division of Drug and Alcohol, the entire team works harder than any other person that I've seen in a very long time. So I'm grateful to have the team that I have. So I have the pleasure of introducing our district attorneys, Cadium Copeland. D.A. Copeland was sworn in as Delaware County's district attorney on January 19, 2018. As a graduate of the Baldwin School, Bryn Mawr College, and Temple University's Beasley School of Law, Ms. Copeland has a distinguished 25-year prosecutorial career and has previously served 19 years in Delaware County's District Attorney's Office. When D.A. Copeland took office, she expressed her commitment for the continuing efforts of the Heroin Task Force in addressing the opioid crisis and partnering with law enforcement, community organizations to turn the tide against this epidemic. D.A. Copeland has expressed her commitment to be a partner with the community agencies and fully staff and encourage the success of our specialty courts, our drug treatment court, our mental health court, and our veterans court here in Delaware County. Please welcome District Attorney Cadium Copeland.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to see all of you here today and so many new faces who I hopefully will get a chance to meet, for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before. So I have been a prosecutor for my entire career, right? I started as a young individual out of law school and immediately fell in love with it. At some point in time, my boss, the then district attorney, approached me in 1998, and he said to me, listen, obviously cotton is one of these new things that's really in our area. Hark back, I'm talking about 1998, and said, I think we need to address the issue of people who are coming in and out of the criminal justice system because of an addiction to drugs. Those are the terms he used. And he said to me, I'd like you to start a treatment court. Walked out of my boss's office, and when your boss tells you to do something, you say yes, right? And so I said, yes, sir. I walked out of that office, and I had one of those Scooby-Doo moments where you sit down and go, what? My area of expertise isn't this. So I took it upon myself to learn. And it's one of those things that I am ever so grateful today to have learned about. And along with our county executive director, Mary Ann Grace, we created back then, and a whole host of other people, including many treatment providers, are well represented here today. And we created treatment court back then in 1998. In 2008, it was revamped. And since then, they've graduated just in the last 10 years. Over 200 people have had 86% success rate in terms of recidivism. And 26 healthy babies. I look at that and I think, those are good numbers. Having said that, since 1999 alone, the number of overdose deaths involving opioids has nearly quadrupled. The epidemic cuts across every single boundary, as you all well know, that you can imagine: gender, geographic, racial, ethnic, socioeconomic. If you asked us, I think 10 years ago, how someone who is addicted to heroin would fare, most people would have said, not so good. The recovery was considered back then bleak. I'm really ever so thankful today to say that we are turning the tide, ever so slightly, but turning the tide nonetheless. People are getting treatment. They are recovering. I say that loud and clear. They are recovering, leading healthy lives, getting jobs, redeveloping lost relationships with family members. And these amazing and life-changing things happen because so many community and county partners jumped in and invested in making it happen. Navigating the waters of the epidemic doesn't happen alone. In Delaware County, we have people willing and able to jump in and using that whole water theme, grab an oar and start rowing against the tide. And rowing against the tide that is trying to overtake our community. In 2012, the Heroin Task Force was formed. And it was formed as a result of a notice of the increased deaths with respect to heroin deaths by our MA. The district attorney partnered with our courts, our county governments, our legislators, our law enforcement, our first responding EMS, our faith-based communities. And we kept adding necessary individuals to the task force, our treatment centers, our business community. Our community as a whole partnered together and created the task force to figure out how to overcome it. And when you bring all those resources together, you're going to see results. Results such as second chance court. Results such as teaching children and parents about narcotics, overdose prevention, and education. Changes like the Certified Recovery Specialist Program. Changes like Medicine Dropbox, like the Second Chance Employment, which is newly created at MVP Recovery. And new innovations which are coming every single day, thanks to the ideas brought to bear by people like yourselves. The Delaware County S.T.O.P Coalition has a vital role in helping us address this epidemic, with the idea of engaging community members and stakeholders to not only increase awareness of available resources in Delaware County, but to end the stigma of substance use disorder. Today's Lunch and Learn is one such effort to utilize the principles of what you all are well familiar with, strategic prevention framework, and use that to assess community needs, to identify goals and objectives, to plan activities, and evaluate all of the effectiveness of those strategies. Using that information, the coalition as a whole can obtain baseline data from the community regarding levels of stigma. It can create vital educational materials regarding the disease of addiction and available treatment resources. The participants you are going to hear from today bring to you a breadth of experience born from varying different backgrounds. And each one brings a key piece of the puzzle to help both address these issues and to present solutions. You'll learn about vital partners like the Office of Behavioral Health, the Keystone Center, Crozier Community Hospital, Recovery, the CRS program. You'll learn about medicated assisted treatment options, about Narcan, about inpatient treatment available, about recovery houses like MVP, and the recovery journey as a whole. I'm ever so thankful to be part of today's program. I have learned so much in my journey. And most importantly, I've learned that perseverance and determination can lead you to conquer any challenge. But there is no need, as you all well know, to engage those challenges alone. There are a whole host of partners who will engage with us, all of you, to make it possible. And as they say, when you put your mind to it, anything is mentioned. So thank you all for being here and participating in the program.
Jenny, you're welcome.
So this is a box of Narcan, and obviously Narcan is used to reverse the effects of an overdose. How many of you have actually been trained in using Narcan? Anyone? Okay, got a lot of people, that's good. So Narcan nasal spray is used to temporarily reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. This is what it looks like. There are 2 packs inside. This is a fired pack. So 2 containers. This is what it looks like. When you hold it, you're going to hold it like this. So if you suspect that somebody has had, if first responders are directed to actually take overdose survivors to the ER where they will be medically cleared and they'll dispatch CRS services. So anytime you have someone who's been given a Narcan, you want to bring them to the ER anytime. They can refuse, but you really want to try to bring them to the ER because it will offer them the opportunity to engage with a CRS, a certified recovery specialist, and be offered treatment options and start that treatment journey, hopefully. So Narcan, so basically what you're going to do is if you see somebody who you think has had an overdose, maybe they've got purple tinged fingers, maybe they're unresponsive, they've got paraphernalia around them, you know that they have an addiction to opiates, what you're going to want to do is first thing call 911, and then you're going to want to, I think these slides are okay, yeah. But anyhow, so you want to get them on their back, you want to call 911 first, you want to shake them, rub their chest, do a sternum rub on their chest to try to wake them up, say their name loudly. If they don't respond, then what you want to do is tilt the person's head back and provide gentle support under the neck with your hand. Gently insert the tip of the nozzle into the nostril, doesn't matter which nostril, in the person's nose. You're going to press the plunger firmly, like that. So it takes a pretty, harsh press. And then if they don't respond in 2 to 3 minutes, you're going to take another pack and actually do it again in the other nostril, the opposite nostril. Sometimes it can take, most first responders report that it takes usually 2 kits to revive somebody. With that said, though, there have been times it's taken 6 kits to revive somebody. And if somebody's got fentanyl-laced opiates, it can take a lot longer. Narcan should be stored at room temperature, and it has no effect on the individual if they don't, if it wasn't an opiate overdose, it's not going to hurt them, it's not going to negatively impact the individual. And it can be dosed every 2 to 3 minutes, and first responders are giving an average, as I said, of 2 doses, and most pharmacies should carry Narcan. Your healthcare provider can give you a prescription if you have a loved one who's dealing with an opiate addiction. And Keystone Center is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for assessment and treatment. They can help individuals obtain insurance or county funding, work with whatever insurance they have, whether it be Medicaid, no insurance, or commercial insurance to help individuals access treatment. We have lots of treatment options and lots of treatment providers here today that will actually share a little bit of information as well. So that's pretty much all you need to do for an individual to give them Narcan. And it is effective and people do recover. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi.
So my name is Juliana Pierre, and I'm a service coordinator at Crozier Community Hospital for the Drug and Alcohol Department. I oversee drug and alcohol intensive case management and the Access Center.
My name is Autumn Miller. I'm a service director at Community Hospital in Crozier. I oversee all of the outpatient services, intensive case management, access, intake, as well as Center of Excellence.
So what we're going to talk about today, we are going to define and discuss the warm handoff process as it happens in this county. We are also going to talk about the certified recovery specialists and their role in facilitating warm handoffs. and as well as our Opioid Center for Excellence at Crozier Community Hospital. So first and foremost, what is a warm handoff? It's a term you may hear frequently thrown around and in conversation when we're just talking about treatment and people seeking treatment, people ending up in the emergency department. But basically it comes down to one thing. A warm handoff is basically when somebody comes in and they present to a treatment provider and they've had a medical event, helping that individual navigate the treatment process and access the appropriate continuum of care. So if we look at the different ways that people can seek treatment, it can get very, very, very convoluted. If you have one insurance versus another, or if you're uninsured, or where you can go to get an assessment, there's a lot of maybe misinformation going around, or things change and people may get confused about the best way that they can access treatment, and then we lose that window. So the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs has worked with different treatment providers and stakeholders to ensure the seamless transition. And it really became a major focus when we started talking about ways that we can tackle and address the opioid epidemic and address overdose survivors that were presenting in emergency departments. So the transparent handoff of care allows somebody, when they have an opioid overdose, they can present in the emergency room department. A certified recovery specialist can be called, and that way that person can start navigating how do I access treatment and what is the best route for me.
So a certified recovery specialist, we use a lot of acronyms a lot. So a CRS, certified recovery specialist, is a person with lived substance use experience. So they have had some type of experience with use and addiction in their history. So being able to use their personal journey of recovery to share with an individual during that engagement, that critical time, is something that we cannot replicate. We cannot replicate it. They have literally not only been in that person's shoes, they may have literally been in that bed that person is in. And we want to provide that intervention at that critical moment. The training of a CRS provides them with the ability to be able to start a screening process so that they can get some paperwork and things started to be able to hand that referral off to the appropriate treatment center, source. They're able to engage bedside. So they're able to go into the emergency department, we're able to go into the hospital for any type of substance use related admission. So again, being able to really help navigate that person from one bed to a treatment bed, really getting them seamlessly in that process, as Juliana mentioned. Being able to help them navigate some of those questions they might have. So being able to ask questions about what does treatment look like? What is it going to look like for me to go to treatment? What are my options for treatment? And really hearing it again from a peer perspective gives it a whole different viewpoint for that person. Okay, we have a certified recovery specialist 24/7, and we serve all 7 area Delaware County hospitals. So we're able to go in, someone would call, whether it be after an overdose or after someone's admitted for another substance use related admission, they would call the CRS line 24/7, and we would be dispatched to go and meet that person and engage with them. Again, we are able to meet with them after they've been stabilized and help get them to treatment. We also can follow up with them after they get to treatment. If they say no and they don't want to go to treatment, we will call them days after, the next day, and say, hey, did you change your mind? Do you want help to get to treatment? And we will help connect them to that treatment at that time. Again, it's a personalized engagement based on the needs of the person and where they're at that moment. So if it's an overdose, we're going to have a lot more of a intense conversation about this is a point that you can make a change. If the person's having another admission related to another health concern, but they have substance use on board, we're going to have a different conversation with them. But again, just trying to get them to look at treatment as an option and what that would look like for them. And we really try to focus on that emergent care and the overdose to be able to facilitate that warm handoff and that no wrong door to get people in.
So this is the state's visual representation of a road to recovery as it applies to a warm handoff. As Autumn talked about, when naloxone, otherwise known as Narcan, is administered, we are connecting with emergent care referral, so they go to the emergency room, the CRS comes in, the warm handoff process is initiated. So the goal at that moment then is to remove any and all barriers that would keep the individual from making a seamless transition into treatment. What are some of these barriers? Okay, I don't have insurance. Where do I go? Who do I speak with? What facility can I go to if I want to seek a medication-assisted treatment? They have that right-hand navigation of, okay, I've been there. These are your options. Let's take these steps together to get you the help that you need. Also, one thing to add. So this model requires the collaboration of several different groups. So we have the individual who has a substance use disorder. We have first responders. We have family and social supports who may have been present or not present when the overdose occurred. We have the treatment provider, the medical hospital. We have the certified recovery specialist, and then any other provider who would come in and administer treatment after the warm handoff is made. So it really takes a bigger picture and a bigger look at how the person becomes the center and things happen around the individual.
So in conjunction with that, the Center of Excellence at Crozier, we were awarded in October 2016 by Governor Wolf the status of Center of Excellence. So with that grant, we are able to support individuals to remove barriers to entering treatment. So through that grant and with the support of the Delaware County Office of Behavioral Health, we are trying to, again, as Juliana said, put that client in the center and remove barriers to getting opioid use treatment. So we have a team approach. There's a care management team, including a nurse navigator, certified recovery specialist, case managers, that again will wrap that person in services and try to get them to all the different steps that they need to have so they can maintain their recovery as their focus. So again, if they have some health concerns, the nurse will help coordinate care with primary care, or if there's anything that could come up during their treatment that could be a barrier to staying in treatment, we want to address all of those needs of that individual.
So how do we make a referral? These are both of the numbers in which you could contact the Opioid Center for Excellence at Crozier Keystone Community Hospital, and also the Delaware County Partnership for the Certified Recovery Specialist team for the emergency room. However, there are several ways in which somebody could access treatment, and I wanted to give a little bit of an example of something that actually happened at our hospital this week. On Tuesday, we had a gentleman present to the Access Center at Community Hospital, as many individuals choose to do. He had put in his paperwork and he decided he was going to go outside, and he ended up overdosing in his vehicle in front of the hospital. We were notified by security. Everybody took the proper steps. Narcan was administered. The emergency department was called that this person was coming. EMS came and transported the individual to the emergency room. When he got to the emergency room, he was met with a certified recovery specialist. That same client was in a bed in a detox within 2 hours. 2 hours. So that's just one example of how seamless this can be. That's not to say that there aren't some things that may go differently or may take a little bit more time, but when everybody has the communication and these skills and tools and programs are utilized, it saves lives. It saves lives. People access treatment. Again, please take down these numbers. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out. We are available again at the CRS Certified Recovery Specialist Program 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That phone line is manned.
And for the Center of Excellence, the only requirement is that you're a Delaware County resident and that you have an opioid use disorder history. So all of the care management wrapping of services, that is no cost to the individual. So,
thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I've been asked to just talk briefly about the disease model of addiction and also to talk about MATs. And we'll do it in 15 minutes, so put on your jetpacks and let's go. I'd like to say that pretty much everything that is experienced as pathology is at some point normal. And so addiction in large part starts out as the experience of pleasure. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking of the example of being a small child, and I had an aunt who lived at the bottom of what seemed to me to be a mountain. And my father, who thought he was Mario Andretti, would fly down this mountain. And when we would hit the bottom, I would get that feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it was extreme pleasure. And I would just light up at the mere notion that we were going to go see her. I got older, and apparently I liked moving fast, and started to love roller coasters, and had a regular Six Flags thing. And went back, and anybody who knows Barbados at all, this mountain is called Rendezvous Hill. I drove down Rendezvous Hill on my own and did not even experience that it was a mountain. It seemed like a relatively flat road to me as an adult. And there was no drop in the pit of my stomach and no excitement. And I started thinking to myself, maybe I had imagined that my aunt lived at the bottom of this hill, because this certainly is not the mountain that brought me such joy when I was a little girl. And so opioids kind of have a similar impact on our system, in that the initial, just living life, we experience pleasures. The first time your child says that they love you, or when this person that you've carried stops saying dada and they finally say mama, your whole body floods with joy. Just regular experiences, a really good steak, like just, sex, just the things that in a day-to-day life bring us joy. Those trigger the release of dopamine in our brain, and it allows us to just experience normal pleasure. What opioids do is that they trigger the same receptors in our brain, but they do it at a level that is magnified significantly more than a good steak can do. And it's similar in the experience that I give you of Rendezvous Hill as maybe a 3-year-old child versus as a 40-something-year-old woman whose experiences of what pleasure and thrill and so on have habituated my brain to understand that the 3-year-old experience of pleasure and the experience of pleasure now, it's different. It takes a lot more to make me have that reaction. And so that's kind of what happens when you encounter opioid addiction. And so it starts out as pleasure. It starts out as this dopamine in your brain that is usually released in a reasonable dose, kind of flooding your entire system and leading to something that can only be described as euphoria. Well, the brain is a sensible organ, and so the brain does not like to be overwhelmed. And so because the brain does not like to be overwhelmed, what it does is it says, opioids, you're not going to scream in my head all day long. I'm going to learn to turn you down. It is the exact reason why you as a single childless person can walk into a grocery store and the sound of a screaming child will make your spinal cord jump, but the parent is happily and obliviously shopping, because out of pure need for survival, they have blunted the reaction of screaming and tantruming. You just don't hear it anymore. And so the brain does something similar. The brain literally reduces the number of cells that are vulnerable to dopamine. And it blunts the impact of dopamine. So what has to happen as a result? Because the person who is taking the opioid does not want to experience pleasure less. They have had euphoria. They want euphoria again. And so it only makes sense that you take more. And so that's kind of what happens, and the body continues to adjust and continues to adjust. And anybody who who has been in active addiction for some time is no longer using the same amount that they were using when they started, because they and the brain are in this consistent back and forth of, it's kind of like an ongoing game of gotcha. So that's what's going on with the individual and the brain. So like I said, it starts out as a seeking of pleasure, but then it kind of later on morphs into being about tolerance and withdrawal. And so what I'm describing when I'm talking about needing more and more and more to get the same effect, well, that's tolerance. Now, the withdrawal portion of it relates to a more primitive brain area. And so there is a portion in our brain that we don't even need to think about. It has to do with our breathing, it has to do with our blood pressure, it has to do with just our regular level of alertness. And what opioids do is that they suppress that level of the brain. And so then the brain, again, being an intelligent organ, says, all right, well, let me stimulate that area of the brain to compensate for the fact that you opioids are trying to depress me. Which works out fine if there are opioids in your system. But if there are no opioids in your system, your brain cannot immediately re-regulate and reduce the stimulation to that area. And so it can take weeks for it to re-regulate. And so as a result, what the person may experience is what we describe as withdrawal symptoms, that jitteriness, that anxiety, the diarrhea, the sweats, all of that kind of comes from the fact that this primitive portion of the brain is activated in response to ongoing opioid use. And so the individual might be motivated to avoid those feelings because nothing I describe, I imagine, sounds like a pleasant experience. And so the individual then will attempt to use something because they want that to go away. And so that's kind of how tolerance and withdrawal play a role in it. And you might be asking yourself, well, where was the frontal lobe in all of this? And that's kind of the point. The frontal lobe, which I call the traffic cop of the brain, the part that allows us to exercise judgment and good reasoning and plan and think about past experiences and consider how they will impact current decision making and future outcomes. That portion of the brain really is insufficiently activated during addiction. So if we that's just the context. So why medication-assisted treatment then? Because if what I have described is a brain and biological disease, then like any other disease that affects our biology, we realize that there is the impact for pharmacology to improve the situation. And that's just kind of the same thing with medication-assisted treatment. Two main kinds that we're aware of and that we talk about. So we talk about agonists and antagonists, and those are just pretty sounding words. Basically, an agonist is something that acts on the brain in the same way that the opioid would. So we talk about full agonists and partial agonists. When you are using a pure opioid, let's say, an opioid of abuse, when it hits your brain, it is an immediate hit and the drop-off is sharp. What the agonist does is that it activates the same centers of the brain, so it locks into the same parts of the brain, but it does not do so with the same initial intensity. So it's kind of like a slow climb up a hill rather than just that kind of straight shot out of a barrel. And the intensity of the drop-off is not as sharp either. It's kind of more of a prolonged period where it stays in the body, where it impacts the brain. So it, in that way, controls the symptoms of withdrawal that an individual might experience, because for all intents and purposes, it is acting as an opioid, but in a more controlled manner. Partial agonists do the same thing, and so I'll just say, for example, that the full agonist that's been in use for about 40 years is methadone, and that's a well-known one that's been out there for about 40 years. Methadone's, let's say, younger cousin, which we consider to be a partial agonist, is buprenorphine. And why it is partial is that it does not stimulate the receptors in the same way, to the same extent that methadone does, but it does also stimulate it, and it also has a long-acting impact on the brain, and so it also reduces the symptoms of withdrawal and so on that an individual might find intolerable. A lot of people have mixed feelings about MATs, mixed feelings about agonists. A lot of people are concerned, well, am I not just replacing one opioid for another? And to some extent, the answer is yes, but. You are, but you are also replacing it with a substance that will act on the brain in a more sustained and controlled manner, and thereby you're able to alleviate the symptoms. Now, like I said, methadone has been in use for 40 years, Suboxone and buprenorphine has been in use for about 16 years. So there's a pretty substantial body of research that shows that people who are on maintenance medications do significantly better than people who are not, in terms of their life expectancy, in terms of decreasing relapse, in terms of decreasing HIV and hepatitis C risk, in terms of specifically for methadone, reducing incarceration risk, just improving general quality of life. The difference in terms of where we talk here about client preferences. Methadone, again, because it is a full agonist, is something that needs to be administered in a very controlled setting. You would imagine that this is not something that you just want people to have access to with no control. And so a part of what can be a little bit of a ticklish issue with methadone is that you need to report to a specific type of facility on a daily basis in order to receive your dosing. And even if you get to the point, which is typically after many years, where you can receive take-home dosing, those take-home doses tend to be very closely monitored. When buprenorphine entered the system, it increased access to medication-assisted treatment just because it was a little bit more accessible. So instead of having to be administered by a specialized facility, you could receive buprenorphine from a community medical provider who had the appropriate credentials to administer buprenorphine. And even certified nurse practitioners, for instance, in some areas are able to dose buprenorphine. So it increases the accessibility of it. But it does raise a concern for some people because then they start worrying more about the potential for diversion. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, so let's just stick a pin there for now. I then want to talk a little bit also about the other categories. So remember I said there were agonists and there were antagonists. The antagonists do not trigger the receptor site. What they do is that they block it. So they're not necessarily helping with withdrawal. What they're doing is preventing euphoria. And there is a sense that in the right dose and in the right circumstances and for the right client, any of these medications could be equally effective, but it's a matter of who, for whom, and what their circumstances are. When naltrexone first came out, it was only available in a pill form. And if you just kind of think about what you all know about the nature of addiction, here is a pill that you have to take on a daily basis for people who tend to not be particularly compliant with medications, and it is not necessarily helping with feelings of withdrawal, but it's kind of blocking the euphoria. Could you get a sense of why people might not be compliant with that? So when the injectable naltrexone, Vivitrol, became available, the long-acting nature of it, the once-a-month dosing of it, really reduced some of the barriers around people who might not be compelled to take a medication on a daily basis that's not helping with withdrawal symptoms. But it also improved the overall effectiveness of what the research was showing us about naltrexone. And so you don't hear a lot of people talking about the use of oral naltrexone because really the literature has not supported that people are sufficiently compliant with it, I think, actually, to just get good outcomes. The other difficulty with naltrexone in general is because it blocks the receptor sites, it potentially could trigger withdrawal for somebody who still had opioids in their system. And so as a result, people need to have gone through the withdrawal process before they can be inducted on naltrexone. And so that's a barrier for some individuals because people who really are chronically using opioids might not be able to tolerate the withdrawal in order to get to the point where they could be inducted on naltrexone. I did talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions and I talked about diversion. What the literature tells us is that ultimately people who are diverting MATs are doing so to either help somebody out. So I know you and I know that you are suffering and you don't have access to your dosing, so I'm going to share my dose with you. Or people who are attempting to buy Suboxone on the street largely are attempting to do so because they are experiencing symptoms that are intolerable, and so they want to use it to kind of self-medicate. What we found is that when those individuals are then later connected to legitimate treatment of their own, they stop diverting. And so to me, that's pretty strong evidence that the diversion was really for the purpose of symptom management and not necessarily for the purpose of attempting to abuse the substance. The other thing that comes up in terms of just perceptions and barriers is this something that people are going to be on for the rest of their lives? And the answer is maybe. And I think that this really comes down to how we perceive addiction and whether or not people have bought the notion that addiction is truly a brain disease. Because I don't think that any reasonable practitioner would ask a diabetic how long they have to take insulin. I don't think that they would. It wouldn't be reasonable. I don't think that you would ask an asthmatic how long they were going to be taking their inhaler. But it seems reasonable to people to kind of say, well, how long are you going to be taking this, MAT? The reality is the status of how we treat opioid addiction at this point is very focused on quick detox and then expecting that through supportive therapy, the individual will kind of be able to maintain sobriety. But the research evidence suggests that that's actually not true. The research evidence actually suggests that there are pretty poor outcomes for people who just detox and who don't maintain themselves on medications. And if we think about it from the biology of the situation, brain structures have been changed over the course of prolonged exposure to substances. So if those brain structures are supposed to heal, shouldn't we consider that the individual might need to be on those medications for quite some time until that circuitry can correct itself? And for some individuals, depending on the severity and the duration of their use, may have to be on maintenance for the rest of their lives. And again, in a disease model, is it unreasonable to think that there are some people who will be treated and who will be able to regain functioning to the point where they won't continue to need medication versus those people who might continue to need the support of medication throughout the rest of their lives? And so that is basically it. Thank you.
Hi everyone.
Hi, Jen.
My name is Jessica Malavi and I work for Miramont Treatment Center. So today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about inpatient treatment for substance use disorders, basically how to access it and what to expect in the process. So typically when working with providers with addictive disorder, you want to look for ones that are offering 24-hour admissions and transportation. Basically, the goal behind that is when an individual finally decides that they're open and willing to go to treatment, you really want to put very little space and time in between that decision and getting them in the front door. So the goal is to really minimize a lot of time of waiting and processing and how we're going to get them there. Because ultimately, the more time they have to wait, the more likely they could create justification or rationalization that they no longer have to go. So ultimately, we want to make it as easily accessible as possible. So what happens first, typically when someone calls to access treatment, is there's a pre-assessment that's done with an admission representative over the phone. And that's just to access things like basic demographics, where they live, their usage, so their history of usage, what they're currently using, how much, how often, so that we can help determine which level of care. And what is their insurance information. So when accessing treatment, or whoever's being the person that's calling, having your insurance information available can really be helpful to make the process go a lot quicker. Once we have the insurance information, we can then verify the benefit. So that just means that we're looking to see that the benefit is active, and we're really trying to find out on the front end, does the person have any sort of deductible or out-of-pocket expense or copay that they may see as a barrier to accessing treatment. So that way we can have that conversation with them up front and really try to minimize some of the stress that comes around the finances and help them just focus on getting into treatment as a priority. Once we do all that, we'll then determine a time and date for intake. Again, we want to make it as quickly as possible after they make that initial decision to get into treatment, and we'll make arrangements to come pick them up and have the family there as well. Once they're in our facility, our admissions representative would then work to get authorization from the insurance company. So that's going to depend on a couple of things. It's going to depend on what the benefit is, what they have access to on their benefit, what the person is presenting in terms of what they're using, how much, how often, what their symptoms are, and what the clinical and medical recommendation is. So that's ultimately which level of care is going to be best suited for this individual. Obviously, if they're using a substance like an opiate on a daily basis, they're going to experience physical withdrawal. So the recommendation plus the symptoms that the patient is presenting is going to be that the insurance authorize a detox level of care. Ultimately, the length of stay is going to vary, again, depending on the insurance provider and what the clinical and medical team is recommending, and ultimately what the person is presenting with. There's obviously, as I'm sure everyone knows, sometimes a disconnect between what we know the person needs and what they're going to get authorized. So a lot of that we're not able to give on the front end. We're able to give an initial authorization for a couple of days, and then we're going to reassess and redetermine what the patient needs are and make that recommendation accordingly. And then the patient would, of course, be admitted. So in an inpatient level of care, you're looking at detoxification versus rehab, two different levels. Detox is the most restrictive level of care a person can be in when it comes to dealing with addictive disorder. It's ultimately going to include some degree of treatment around small group process, psychoeducational lectures, individual therapy. They're being exposed to the nature of the treatment experience, but really it's about safe, secure medical stabilization. We really want to look at what symptoms the person is presenting with and what risk factors they could have so that we can appropriately medicate that and ensure that the person is stabilizing without risk factors. Once that happens, the person is then prepared to step down to a rehab level of care. So really, inpatient rehab is about pulling the individual out of an addiction-centered lifestyle and putting them in one that's recovery-oriented. So we're trying to create as much structure around a sobriety-based life as possible. So in this process, they're really going to start to dive a little deeper and start to address some of the symptoms and criteria specifically related to addictive disorder. So they're going to start to engage in things more like didactic and experiential trauma work, because at this level of care, they're more prepared to look at some of the core underlying issues that's driving a lot of their patterns of self-sabotage and self-harm, some of their behavioral symptoms or impulsivity issues that we want to develop some coping skills for, some basic emotional management skills, some dysfunction within their relationships and family environment, and ultimately peer-to-peer connection and relationship. So they're also going to be engaged in individual and group therapy and psychoeducational lectures because ultimately it's about helping the person understand what this diagnosis is and how to effectively treat it. We have to teach them that and educate them so that they're prepared when they leave to follow through on it. We also engage in family sessions because ultimately, as I'm sure you'll hear in this process, the family is a huge part of the diagnosis. They are just as symptomatic as the addict is. So it is very crucial and important that they are part of the treatment process. And once the person is stable and engaged in the inpatient program and sort of learning a little bit more about what their underlying issues and concerns are, we can then invite the family members or those who are in relationship with them so that they can then process their concerns and everybody can kind of get on the same page with what the primary goals are for life after treatment. Specialty services are obviously going to be according to the program and according to the individual, but everybody should be assessed for specific needs, right? So not one person is going to respond the same as the person next to them when it comes to a treatment for addiction. Everybody is unique. Everybody comes from different backgrounds. Everybody has different experiences. Somebody may be more equipped to deal with trauma than somebody else is. Somebody may be a chronic relapser and requires specialized treatment for that. If somebody's a first responder, they're going to be exposed to workplace trauma in a way that a civilian could never really process or understand. So it's important to give access to specialty programs that really support the individual needs in a way that the person can kind of have a specific treatment plan and direction. Continuing care planning. So aftercare is significant and important, and we don't want to let anyone leave the inpatient environment without an aftercare plan already in place. So we're looking at kind of how they've stabilized, how they've met their treatment goals, and what are we recommending that they need to continue to do to really create optimal outcomes of success. The goal is we want to minimize risk for relapse and increase their outcomes. Alumni and family programs, so I talked a little bit about family. We do offer psychoeducation family programs on the weekends as well, as most programs will. In inpatient, you really want to take advantage as a family member of getting as educated as possible, learning what resources of support are available for them, so that they can really address anything that they've gone through as a result of the addiction and learn how to properly support themselves and the person that's in treatment. Alumni is really about community, so as we know, a big aspect of treating addiction is the power of community, the power of we. So we really want to introduce them to 12-step programs or programs such as Refuge Recovery while they're in the treatment process, so they can learn how to develop relationships with peers that are working towards the same goal of sobriety as they are, so that they're supported in the experience. And that prior to leaving, they already have that network established. This is just some information about all the programs that we offer. On our main campus, we do have a full continuum of treatment. So again, the goal following inpatient is not to go from a 24-hour restrictive level of care back to just a 12-step meeting in an outpatient group. We want to slowly transition people through lower levels of treatment so that they have better success. So on our main campus, we are offering things like partial hospital treatment and intensive outpatient and outpatient. And we do have other locations where we're offering primary mental health treatment for both adolescents and adults and substance abuse treatment for adolescents and adults. It's a little bit of a different population when you're working with adolescents. So again, you have to create specialty programs that are geared more towards that population. We also have services, just so you guys know, around Women's Emotional Wellness Center. This is in Newtown Square, and it's really specific to women who are going through issues related to motherhood, gender-specific needs, or require support around postpartum depression or any other mental health issues or concerns. Bryn Mawr Psychiatric Unit is for those people who are going through more acuity when it comes to mental health diagnosis, and they require a more higher level inpatient level of care. And then, of course, First Call EAP, so anybody who has an employee assistance program involved can be protected and kind of access services for substance abuse and mental health through that. So thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
So my name is Brian Corse. I'm the director and founder of MVP Recovery. We're a sober living program here in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. So we operate 14 recovery homes. We have 22 female beds in our women's program, 69 male beds in our male program. So coming up here, I wanted to talk about sober living as a whole and recovery housing. And it's a little bit difficult because unlike the other level of cares, there isn't an exact baseline that I can share that all recovery housing does X, Y, and Z. Because currently recovery housing is unregulated, it's unmonitored, and there's no oversight on who provides what and how they do that. That's all going to change, and I'm going to talk about that later. But just to kind of talk about because there's a lot of quality recovery housing programs throughout the state of Pennsylvania, and to talk about what works for these programs and what these programs do, and as providers, what to look for. And I think the thing that I would like to stress the most is, if anybody is referring to recovery housing, sober living, it's really important to see them firsthand, okay? Because this right here, this pretty brochure, $12 to make 50 of them, okay? And I see a lot of gorgeous brochures going around. Don't always line up with what's going on at the recovery housing. So it's real important to go down there, find out what's going on, and kind of get feedback from individuals that have gone through that. Recovery housing's been around for a long time, but it's really breaking into the level of cares recently in the midst of this epidemic that we're hearing about it more and more. Because one of the things we identify is, they talk about the average number of times that someone kind of goes into treatment is almost 7 times before they, become clean and sober. And people get very frustrated with that. I have a 24-year-old that's, been in treatment 7 times in the last 2 years, And the question is, this is an individual that, you know, in the midst of this opiate epidemic has crossed the line into intravenous heroin use. Somebody that, you know, embraces that lifestyle that comes with this addiction. So we send them to inpatient treatment. And as we all know, insurance companies are shortening the lengths. So after, God willing, 30 days in inpatient treatment, we're sending these individuals back to the same environment, back to the same stressors, back to the same triggers that are around them. So the things that we talk about, people, places, and things, let's send them back to those people, places, and things. And that's where recovery housing has stepped up to fill that gap from leaving an inpatient treatment center before returning home. Good recovery housing program, the goal is to learn to establish a solid foundation of recovery so you can move forward and out of that recovery house program independently into, you know, your 12-step support or whatever path of recovery it is you choose as you leave out of there. But with a better understanding and a better foundation. As Dr. King talked about, it takes a long time for our brain waves to return to what it was if, you know, after we've been using for an extended period of time. And to think that after 2 or 3 weeks of treatment and not expect somebody to, you know, to slip up, you know, I think that's unrealistic in a lot of ways. So recovery housing, one of the types that has been around for a very long time is the Oxford houses. And they're the most known all throughout the country. And the Oxford house model has always been, it's almost like a 12-step home group. It's a group conscience. You know, the individuals at the house vote on the members coming in. It's a group conscious of the rules, what they're going to do, and different things like that. And that, in the level of cares of recovery housing, that's the most independent. And that works really well for individuals that have some recovery time, that have some clean time, that are mature enough to embrace that type of structure and support. However, it's not really the level of care when we talk about that individual that's leaving a treatment center after 30 days in treatment and no experience with recovery to just kind of go in with that that looseness structure, you know. So so from the Oxford houses in the last 15 years has created the new form of recovery housing that most of us know about. And that's that typical, instead of that group conscious of deciding what the rules is, it's that rules are already put in place. There's a hierarchy there to enforce the rules and hold the individuals accountable. And in the last 15 years, recovery housing in that model has grown exponentially. It started in the Florida area, and that's the #1 area for these type of recovery houses. And then right in our backyard in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, that's the #2 area for these types of recovery houses in this country. So it's all around us. And for me, when I was a case manager here at the Keystone Center, I was identifying that we were sending a lot of clients off to recovery houses in Florida or in Bucks County. And many of them that were doing well, and they were returning home 6 months, a year later. And of course, you know, we would interact with them if the individual relapsed and came back. So getting some kind of data collection and some feedback from these individuals, the question was, you were doing good for almost a year, you know, what happened? Why are you back in the treatment? And one of the main things identified was, you know what, I went off to Florida, I went off to Bucks County, and you know, I created a sober support network. I had a sponsor, I had a home group, I had sober friends, I was involved in the recovering community there. And then, you know, Delaware County is my home. This is where I was going to move back to. Maybe I have a kid here, I have parents here. This is where, you know, I want to live. And the individual would move back home, and they would leave their sponsor, they would leave their home group, they would leave their sober support network, and they would come back home in a couple months. They would say they, you know, felt embarrassed going into new meetings because they felt, you know, that ego gets in the way. They felt they weren't a newcomer. They got a year plus clean and sober. They didn't know anybody. They get a little bored. Who do they start calling? Old friends. And with old friends come old habits. And so one of my goals was to open sober living here in Delaware County to help individuals to build a solid foundation of recovery in the community that they're going to choose to live in. And, you know, so we opened MVP in 2014 with that goal. And, you know, we have grown, you know, exponentially since then. And we've been, you know, getting individuals from communities, you know, across the country. And, the thing that that we've identified, with the people that are coming in here is, they're looking for recovery. That's what a recovery house talks about. So no matter what the pathway of the recovery is, but there's a baseline standard that individuals expect when they're coming into sober living. And a baseline that we talk about in the industry is recovery housing providing referrals to outpatient counseling. So as individuals are leaving inpatient treatment center and they're moving into a sober living, that they are still participating in the outpatient counseling. Because one of the things is recovery housing is simply housing. So you can't, at MVP, our program is a therapeutic program, but it's not anything where we therapeutically bill for it. The counseling has to be off-site. So individuals that are going into sober living, it can't stop there. Individuals need to continue to participate in outpatient counseling on a long term to get that trauma counseling, to get that addiction counseling, to get whatever outside counseling it is they need, mental health counseling. And then another baseline that goes with recovery housing is to ensure that the program mandates individuals to participate in 12-step support meetings. Because one of the reasons that recovery housing has existed, as we talked about in the beginning, is to help those individuals that if leaving inpatient treatment and going home, they might not necessarily be motivated or self-disciplined enough to get themselves to that meeting, to get that sponsor, to follow through on that program. However, the recovery housing is what bridges that gap to help support them and sometimes force them to do those things until we're ready to do it on our own. And those are the things that we're looking at when we're identifying that baseline for recovery housing. So there are good questions to ask and to know as we're referring to that, because when I first started working in this field, recovering housing, sober living, seemed to be for individuals that didn't have other options. It seemed to be for people that were sitting in a rehab that had nowhere else to go. In the midst of this opiate epidemic, sober living has become a level of care. It has become a continuation of care. How many clients do we work with on a daily basis are ready to leave that inpatient treatment after using for an extended period of time and to return to that same environment with that same stressors and the same triggers? Not many. And that's why it's been so important to be able to build sober living communities in individuals' communities. Because at MVP, 60% of our residents are parents. And that's a huge barrier when asking somebody, to take this risk, to work through this fear, but then to send them 45 minutes or 2 hours away. So they can continue to build those sober support relationships while they're in our program, because they only live 10 minutes, 25 minutes away. So that's why it's real important, for sober living to exist in various communities, throughout the country. And because of no regulation, because of no certifications, recovery housing can get a negative stigma, just like anyone else, because we want to focus on the negative of things. However, that's why we're very proud here at MVP and why we participate in a lot of events and participate with the Heroin Task Force and do events like this, because we want to get the word out there. As Ann started off this morning, recovery is possible. People do recover, and they're recovering every single day. In the past 4 years, we've had 72 graduates of MVP recovery, and 88% of them have not picked up a drink or drug since graduating from our program. And because we've established ourselves in the community, they still participate in the community, which allows us to continue to track that data. And for those that had relapsed, they had a recovering community they reached out to immediately to help them get back into the treatment that they needed. And as we all know, in the relapse cycle, if we can, if the next, relapse is shorter and less intense, then something worked the first time around, and the success for treatment follow-up, increases dramatically. So what has changed? What's changing is about 2 years ago, I had the privilege of going to Harrisburg and working with Senator McGarrigle out of Springfield. He introduced legislation in the U.S. State Senate to begin regulating recovery housing here in the state of Pennsylvania. And so I think on the list there was about over 300 different sober living programs here in Pennsylvania. And MVP Recovery happened to be the only one that was supporting this legislation. Because this legislation is putting a lot of mandates in place, such as the size of people in the recovery house. There's been, I'm not familiar with other recovery housing outside of mine, but there's been reports that sometimes, there's a lot of people that are cramped into a house and different things like that. And, what's the therapeutic value of that? You see, here at MVP, most of our houses are 3 to 4 bedrooms, and we do anywhere from 6 to 8 people. This legislation also is going to start focusing more on a lot of clinical. So even though we're not doing counseling on site or anything like that, there's a lot of things in this legislation. Well, first of all, the legislation was to have DDAP oversee sober living. And in the guidelines that DDAP has put out, it's bearing a lot on clinical. So if individuals don't have experience in DNA, don't have education in DNA, it's going to be a little hard to understand and put forth those regulations that DDAP is going to start. It's rolling this out in June of 2020. So that was another good thing. It wasn't something that was rushed. So it's something they're taking their time on to make sure that it's done properly. And from this, what's going to happen is there's going to be a list of certified sober living across the state of Pennsylvania that providers can utilize. Because obviously we can't always get out to the place that we're referring somebody to. So to have that list and to know that the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programming is monitoring and certifying these programs just as all our inpatient and outpatient programs. And what that does is it allows sober living to start to become the legitimate level of care that it is. It opens up pathways for possible funding, maybe insurance companies, different things like that. It's not possible until there's an authoritative body overseeing that. See, once again, being in Delaware County and just spearheading so many things, MVP Recovery has been monitored and regulated by the Office of Behavioral Health for going on 3 years now. We have inspections come in, we have them come in and monitor, and we also get the support from them. And it's things like that, and it shows that having that governing body, what that success can be working with an entity like that. So we're real excited with moving forward with that and what that's going to change across the landscape of sober living. And hopefully, change the stigma surrounding it and allow people to know that it is a legitimate level of care, and it's a needed level of care for many people. So, that's what I wanted to share here today with you guys. I thank you for having me out, and thanks for letting me share.
Hi, my name's Al Hart. I work for Malvern. This is Erica. She is our ROC manager. We're here to do a real quick synopsis of what ROC is. It's not music. It's an acronym that stands for Recovery Oriented Community. What we noticed as clinicians is a big piece, and everybody talks about how addiction is a family disease. The families really get put, and you hear anybody who does treatment of whatever kind, we talk about the individual who is suffering, the alcoholic or the drug addict. We talk about them incessantly. The families, we see them for a weekend, we see them for a couple hours, we offer them a session while the patients are there, but then we send the patients right back to their loved ones. And their loved ones sometimes don't make that switch. They don't make that transition into recovery. What ROC is, it's more recovery than clinical. We don't take away from the 12 steps of Al-Anon and Nar-Anon. We actually couple with them, and we partner that with technology. The thing about Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, they are very adamant as to you need to follow certain steps, you have to have a sponsor. And what we recognize is sometimes it's a huge shift for families to go from, please, Johnny, come back with that car, to, all right, you're not taking the car. That's a big jump for people to make. Not everybody's ready to make that jump all the time. We don't discourage people from going to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon. In fact, we encourage that. But what rock does is it gives them the availability to be around others who have experienced their loved ones being caught up in this addiction. It gives people an opportunity to not only go to our meetings, which we have meetings in three different counties as of now, but they can actually sit at home and get the messages via text. We have a rock coordinator who sends out articles and information daily. We have a Facebook page that is closed just to rock members, so they can have conversations amongst each other. We have opportunities for the families to kind of heal themselves by themselves. We do go to the meetings, but we go once a month. The families actually facilitate the meetings themselves. We do have some older rock members. Our oldest meeting is in Plymouth meeting. It's about maybe a year and a half old. So we have some senior members who have been coming from the OnStart who actually help, not sponsor, but help the newcomers and get them involved. The meetings are open to all individuals. They don't necessarily have to be in treatment at Malvern. We have meetings right here in Springfield on Baltimore Pike. It's on Monday night, and we have a nice turnout in which family members recognize they're finally getting the help they need, because it is a family disease. It's not just the addict and the alcoholic, because it really goes and it filters into their thinking and their way of doing things. A lot of the family members are so worried about their loved one getting treatment, getting help, they forget to take care of themselves.
So my name is Erica, and I am the ROC manager in the Recovery Oriented Community. I'm going to use this PowerPoint that we use for orientation for our new hires, just to kind of give you guys the same idea that we give to them. Again, this just talks about our philosophy, and the continuum of care is the main focus for us at the ROC program. We recognize that it's a family disease, and like Al said, you have that family member who maybe this is their first time going through this. Maybe they're still in their own steps of denial. Maybe they're trying to hide what's really going on in their family from their coworkers and their neighbors and things like that. So our main focus is to get them out, to get them educated, and to help them through their own path of recovery.
One of the things a lot of our family members experience, just as the addict and the alcoholic, is the stigma of this disease. That they can't show their head in the grocery store because of what their son, husband, daughter, wife, loved one did.
This slide here just talks about how, like Al said, a lot of what we do is through text messaging. So although if a person comes through our facility, we try to engage the family or the loved one who's bringing them in at the time of admission to kind of help start along the journey. What we have seen from that is it helps once we get the families educated with AMA blocking and people leaving against medical advice. It also helps with the support when you have the loved one who's on the phone who wants to convince you why they don't need aftercare and why they can just come right back home and go back to work and jump back into society and everything's fine. Giving the families the education, things
How
to
to
look
put
for.
clear, definable boundaries in place.
Two of the major things we work with people is, like Al said, the boundaries, and the other thing is also the difference between enabling and helping. A lot of times with the families, they don't understand the difference. They want to be the protector, and they want to give their loved one $50 a day to eat while they're not working. Well, we're trying to help where maybe, let's not give them the money in their hand, let's maybe buy them something to eat, let's take them out, let's touch base, let's see what's going on. Also, one of the things I know from the family members who come through ROC, a lot of the people who come in who may have a loved one struggling, may have a loved one in treatment, or may have a loved one who has a year or more clean, who is working the program and doing well, they're still coming back to get that other support, and again, to kind of help others and guide them through making the best decisions.
We had a young lady last Saturday, she's 84, and she was finally able to put her 52-year-old son out because of the support she's found in the group. But for over 35 years, this young man has divided her and her husband, who both have severe health problems, and in their 80s, they're struggling in how to cope and how to help their son, who's like taken everything that they've worked for their entire lives, and finally, not to be cruel, but finally were able to put and instill a boundary in which he could not come home.
So So we have the two-pronged approach with ROC. A small portion of what we do is the patient support. So I'll reach out again through text messages, maybe sending articles. It's really empowerment for anybody who comes through Malvern and wants to sign up. It's really just another stone in the foundation. I'm not acting as a sponsor. I'm giving them resources, guidance, education. Sometimes I'm just a listening ear when they want to talk. We have had recently we have had prior patients who kind of reach out and just send a random text message first thing in the morning that says, I'm struggling and I need help. So because they're a member of ROC and I'm able to get that text when I wake up through this emergency text that I have come through, we're able to get with them first thing in the morning, get them to an assessment center, maybe get them to call in and do the assessment and start whatever process we need to take. The family support is the main part of ROC, and mostly it's a lot of what we do with the families. We now have our 4th meeting that we opened, so everything's going good. We have family members, again, like he said, doesn't have to be someone who came through Malvern or whoever come through Malvern. We encourage people to bring their neighbors who have loved ones struggling. We also look out to get people who have maybe experience in long-term recovery, who have a loved one in long-term recovery, to come out and again help talk to the families, spreading education awareness and things like that. We have done like Narcan trainings. We've done.
We've had doctors come out to speak to them specifically about co-occurring disorders. We've had mothers and sons come out to speak about the recovery experience from both versions. We've had a father and his daughter come who talked about when the father had nowhere to turn, he was able to turn to his peers. We had situations like that to come that the people really understand and they're able to relate to, and they recognize they're not in this alone, because for the family members, that shame and stigma is like 20-fold. They feel so isolated and unable to do anything to help their loved ones, as well as no one can understand. It's not like they're going to report that their son has diabetes and the doctor says, well, okay, let's get you into treatment. If they go in and they say, my son is an opiate addict, they know the looks they're going to get, and a lot of them are ashamed.
And last but not least, this is just a list of the meetings we have that are open to the families or anybody who has a loved one struggling. That's it.
Thank you.